On their hunt for profit, they set sail into icy regions, the captains of the German Hanse. 300 years before Portuguese and Spanish sailors began to explore the seven seas, they navigated their ships thousands of miles across northern waters. Yet the cogs, the cargo freighters of the Middle Ages, didn't always reach their destination. Trade back then was another word for adventure. Reefs, gales, and pirates could turn an otherwise profitable voyage into disaster. The legendary wealth of the Hanse, a league of long-distance traders founded about 1200 AD, came at a price. Many of their cogs foundered and took their secrets with them. The Baltic Sea, a graveyard of ships. Some 20,000 wrecks lie at its bottom, from dugout canoes to steel cruisers from 2 world wars. Among them, the sunken relics of the might of the German Hanse. As if in a time capsule, they have been conserved as traces of a past which is now being carefully revealed by underwater archaeologists. They discover a lot more than teapots, coins, and guns. Their finds provide new insights into an important chapter of European history. Did the Hanse advance much farther than was commonly believed? A research vessel scans the bottom of the Baltic Sea for anomalies. Underwater archaeologist Thomas Förster has specialized in locating historical shipwrecks. State-of-the-art sonar technology helps. There's a promising object on the screen. Buoys are set to mark the site. The divers must prepare for icy conditions. Yet visibility underwater is best during winter because there are fewer algae. It's a view into the past through diving goggles. In 1977, lifeguards came across parts of a wreck off the Dars Peninsula. Back then, due to the proximity of the border with East Germany, any exploration of the site was unthinkable. However, times have changed, and so the divers from the local Department for the Conservation of Historic Monuments can begin to decipher the jumble of ribs, planks, and stern. Thomas Förster is assembling the puzzle on his PC to get an idea of the ship's construction and enhance the missing parts. His experience pays off. It's a cog, the equivalent of today's container ships. And that's what it would have looked like. 21 meters long, 7 meters wide. Built from oak felled in the Vistula region around 1300 AD. Since it lay sideways in the silt, its starboard section is well preserved. Its cargo as well. The retracing of the cog's final voyage tells of a most lucrative, although not always law-abiding, commerce. The League of Merchants had woven a pan-European network that permitted long-distance trade unhindered by any borders. It proved to be an outstanding blueprint for success based on the revolutionary idea of giving trade interests priority over national policies. At its heyday, some 200 cities were members of the League united by a common goal: to maximize profit. Operational accidents like the loss of the cog off Dars were merely write-offs. Viligrad Palace on the shores of Lake Schwerin. In the labs of the Conservation Department, the finds are being analyzed, like this 3-legged pot bearing the city seal of Lübeck. Yet there are also countless specimens of seemingly strange wooden spits. Their function becomes clear when the other finds are evaluated. There are vertebrae of thousands of cod, yet not a single head. So, the cog had been transporting stockfish, which explains the spits. The bones and wood have been preserved. As for the fish themselves, they must have been a welcome addition to the diet of their Baltic contemporaries. The cargo is a first clue to the cog's itinerary. Stockfish came from the north and promised a high profit, so the unwieldy wooden freighter had braved the rough waters of the North Sea. A cog like this could load up to 80 tons of cargo, so it was well worth the risk of cutting out any middlemen and buying directly from the producers. The Shetlands, known for their peat and their sheep. And of course, for their ponies. Back then, the islands were under Norwegian rule. Today, they belong to Scotland. The fishing grounds off their rocky coasts have plenty to offer. Yet they lie far out in the stormy Atlantic Ocean, almost 1,000 nautical miles away from the core area of the Hanse in the Baltic. Did the tubby single-mast cogs really get that far? Was the prospect of gain that much stronger than caution? Natasha Mailer thinks so. The young archaeologist is an expert on Hanse activities in the north. As for her pregnancy, she merely quips, "This way my baby will get used to fieldwork early on." Along with Endre Elvestad and Mark Gardner, colleagues from Norway and Northern Ireland, she is searching for the medieval seafarers' trading posts. A protected bay like this would have been a perfect site. Even a heavy cog could have anchored here safely 600 or 700 years ago, provided it managed the sea passage in one piece. The team looks for evidence.
Any crossing must have been an adventurous affair, since the ships were comparatively small. Getting here took 2 weeks, mostly across open sea, be there gales, sun, or whatever weather. And when they entered a bay like this, which is a good natural harbor, they would certainly have been glad to have made it.
Natasha has studied contemporary sources for references that may relate to Hanseatic presence in the Shetlands. She has assembled a list of ancient place names, but that won't help much using modern maps.
They decided to banish him to Papa Stewart.
Ruby Brown's family has been farming for 5 generations around the bay at Gunnister Voe. It's a lucky encounter. Ruby knows the old names, and as she tells the researchers, there are even ruins around. Early next morning, Endre Elvestad is on his way to take a closer look. The location overlooking the bay is fine in principle, but the building is much too large for a storehouse. And this mug is by no means medieval. Endre is disappointed. These are the remnants of a farmhouse. But then, a brick. Bricks weren't used on the island, so this one must have ended up here after having served as ballast on a ship. The cog at Darse, too, had taken on bricks to stabilize the hull. At the beach, there are large blocks of stone. Mark and Natasha are positive that their layout isn't accidental. When they survey the blocks, it becomes clear that the stones were laid out in a horseshoe pattern. This was once a jetty, a small port. Burnt fragments of grain. They may be tiny, but the archaeologists will still be able to determine their age. And there are foundations close to the jetty, right behind the entrance to the bay, a perfect site. Yet on the naked rocks, there's nothing more to be found. Based on their finds, the researchers reconstruct a plain storehouse built of undressed stones next to the jetty. And the grain dates from the era of the Hanse. This is what Gunnestur Voe might have looked like back then. The merchant would have lived aboard his cog and used the storehouse for trading. His stay at this outpost would have lasted throughout the summer months, while he waited for the local fishermen until the hold had filled with stockfish in exchange for grain, beer, wood, and tar. It was a win-win deal, as Mark Gardner from Queen's University Belfast explains.
It was a bit of a benefit for everybody because the Shetlanders got access to goods which they simply would not have been able to obtain. And of course the Germans got the fish which they could sell for a good price back in Germany. So it was a good trade for everyone.
Endre prepares for a dive. In view of the meager finds on land, he hopes that some items from the traded goods might have gone overboard. This would allow it to be determined more precisely what had been traded here, apart from stockfish. At 8 degrees Celsius, the water is crystal clear. Conditions are perfect. Yet apart from a fantastic underwater flora, there's nothing to be seen. Had the lost items been retrieved again by the merchants? Or did they never lose anything in the first place back then? Whatever the case, it's a blank. Next stop, the island of Unst and the ruins of a church. Christianity arrived here as early as the 10th century, long before the merchants of the Hanse. According to ancient chronicles, the King of Norway had added the Shetlands to his realm about that time. The chronicles also tell of merchants from the city of Bremen who are said to have lived here steadily, unlike the merchants at Gunnestur Voe. Natasha looks for their gravestones and comes across an inscription. It's virtually indecipherable, but if you know how, there are ways. The old trick works. There's an S, and soon the entire text can be read. It's the grave of merchant captain Segabad Detgen from Bremen, who died on the 20th of August, 1573, having traded on the Shetlands for 52 years. Apparently, some weather-beaten seamen had rather liked it up here. Stockfish had brought him wealth, without violence and slavery. The Hanse was following a different concept than the conquistadors when they plundered the southern hemisphere in the 16th century. The merchant's motto was, "Serious business with long-term partners." Hundreds of miles away from his true love, a German merchant has left his maxim above his bunk. Be forthright at all times, but never neglect the need for vigilance. Natasha and Endre have collected sufficient evidence to prove that the Hanse had advanced as far as the Shetlands. So the cog from Dars, too, might have anchored here at some time. Its cargo of stockfish is a clear indication of contact. And there's one more. Apart from its cargo, there were also provisions of firewood aboard the sunken cog. Exactly what you needed if you anticipated a longer stay in treeless regions like the Shetlands. A cooking pot like this one from Lübeck would have been of little use without a fire. In all likelihood, the cargo of stockfish was destined for a German port. But which one? Lübeck was the Hanse's gateway to the north as well as the seat of the League. Lübeck law applied in all cities of the Hanse, from Novgorod to Bruges. Since 1987, its medieval city center has been a World Heritage Site. The Holsten Gate protected the Queen of the Hanse, which, back then, numbered among the greatest cities of the Holy Roman Empire, as Rolf Hemmel-Kiso from the Research Center for the History of the Hanse explains. Here, at the Mariners' Guild, the Bergen farer, who took their name from the Norwegian port Bergen, dined at a table of their own, with a stockfish for a coat of arms. A treasure from Hanseatic times, and this was merely the small change. The multitude of currencies tell of their owners' far-flung connections. The German Hansa operated all over Europe, yet not without peril. Documents in the city archives have recorded pirate attacks on merchants. Their wealth lured many a man into trying his luck as buccaneer. Some, like Klaus Störtebeker, enjoy legendary status even today. The merchants meticulously listed everything that was of worth to their trade. They also recorded their losses in terms of money. Loss of life, however, is hardly mentioned. The Norwegian fjords were perfect hunting grounds for pirates. Natasha Mailer is an archaeologist as well as a historian, combining on-site research and the study of written sources. The Hansa went to some lengths to defend their precious cargoes. The cogs may not have been warships, yet they were armed. When times were getting especially rough, the merchants even hired mercenaries. But an all-out anti-pirate campaign was much too costly and stood little chance of success due to the unfavorable topography of the fjords. Norwegian sagas tell of bloody sea battles inside the fjords, fought for the crown and for profit. At the royal court at Bergen, murder and mayhem seem to have been the order of the day. For their part, the Hansa merchants set their minds strictly on business. Norway offered them considerable geographic advantages. Their heavy cogs, always tricky to manage, could sail in sight of the shore over long distances. Their destination was the German branch of the Hansa in the royal capital of Bergen. The sail-training vessel of the Norwegian Navy welcomes Natasha Mailer and Friedrich Lüth of the German Archaeological Institute. He supervises her project. Their aim is to establish the outer reaches of the Hansa Empire. Yet first they are enjoying a rare sight. A German U-boat and a Russian submarine nose to nose. Bergen is celebrating its annual harbor festival. At its center, the Tyske Bryggen, the German pier, once one of the four major branches of the Hansa, comparable only to Novgorod, Bruges, and London. They were extraterritorial settlements, exempt from local law. To the merchants, Bergen was a most lucrative destination. They applied the latest methods of bookkeeping as well as cashless transactions, which only recently had been developed in Italy. Theirs was a globalized economy, revolving around stockfish. And that's what the Germans offered for trade: cloth, fabrics, grain, as well as its most potent byproduct, spirits. Easy to make and in high demand up in the cold north. The cog from Dars would also have had some high-percentage beverages aboard when it entered Bergen harbor. In her search for traces of the Hansa, Natasha is on familiar ground. She has studied for 2 years in Bergen and took part in excavations in the old city. The German pier was rebuilt after a devastating fire in 1955. The German colony of merchants was a strictly secluded area, living space for 2,000 men, all of them bachelors, as was required by Hansa rules. While the Rack Railway takes us up the Hausberg overlooking Bergen Harbor, Natasha tells us that in spring, whole shiploads of girls from Bremen or Hamburg would have arrived. a most welcome sight for the men far from home and from any female company. Most surely, they were bristling with anticipation.
You can probably tell us something about what went on here at the German pier. I mean, there were only men living here.
You have to imagine that many merchants had brought their staff along, their journeymen, their apprentices. So it was an all-male society. Yet we may assume that life wasn't too boring for them and that there was some opportunity for pleasure.
So right here next to the pier, there was a red light district?
Yes, there is positive evidence that prostitution was practiced here.
And it wasn't just the girls' favors that gave cause for quarrels.
There was huge competition between merchants of the Hanse and their Norwegian counterparts about stockfish. What made stockfish such a precious commodity?
In the late Middle Ages, stockfish was one of the most important trading goods in Northern Europe. There were more than 100 days of fasting throughout the year, and since fish was an approved fasting diet, it was much sought after. So in all of Europe, stockfish was in extremely high demand, and being dried, it was perfectly preserved, easy to transport, and of almost limitless durability.
The Christian calendar back then knew 140 days of fasting. That's why stockfish trade was a virtual money machine. How much so becomes clear when the archaeologists study footage of one of the greatest medieval excavations in all of Europe. It had been undertaken as an emergency measure after the Great Fire of 1955. There were hundreds of thousands of finds. Merely 10% have been evaluated until now. In the depot of the Briggen's Museum, the German researchers are looking for objects which might shed some light on the cargo of the cog from Dars. Like these strange, elongated pieces of stone. During the Middle Ages, they were a highly valued import from Norway. Whetstones from Eidsborg, halfway between Bergen and Oslo, were much sought after throughout Europe. In the lab at Viligrad, they have analyzed similar finds from the cog. And indeed, they show mica schists from Eidsborg which were traded via Bergen. So the cog must have called there on its final voyage. Its route becomes ever clearer. Back at the depot, a three-legged pot found in the soil below the German pier, a most precious object to archaeologists. It's similar to the one found in the cog and is now being carefully restored in Viligrad. Its glossy surface is due to the corrosion of the bronze. Retrieved from the bottom of the Baltic Sea, the pot is yet another proof of the global contacts of the Hanse. There are clues of an even earlier establishment of the Hanse somewhere in the Norwegian fjords. It's still shrouded in mystery. It's mentioned in yellowed texts, and its name can be found on old maps. Notau. But no one has yet been able to pinpoint its exact location. A sunken place surrounded by legends. Notau is said to have been a prime target for raiding pirates until the outpost was finally relocated to safer Bergen. A bay on the Isle of Karmøy, 120 kilometers south of Bergen. An old map has drawn the researchers' attention. Natasha tries a glass-bottom scope. There are bones. And some distance further on, strange heaps of stone. To Natasha and her colleague Endre, it's soon obvious that this must have been refuse from ships. And so they hope there may even be more down there. Time for another dive. The bottom of the sea is covered with pot shards, bones, and bits and pieces of all sorts. Is this the household waste of a settlement, or are these merely stray objects lost while loading and unloading? Both options are possible. Yet most important, there are goods Hanse merchants would have had in stock. Siegburg stoneware, a prime export from the Rhineland. A merchant's seal and his comb made of bone. More pots from Siegburg. There's no doubt medieval cogs had called here. Have the archaeologists hit upon lost Notau? Time to apply some high-tech. What may look like a derrick is actually a mobile laser scanner able to reveal man-made structures in the ground which are nearly invisible to the human eye. The site at Avaldsnes will be given a thorough workover. The geophysicists managed their job in just 2 days. 140,000 square meters have been measured down to millimeter size. Natasha instantly identifies layouts of houses, a fascinating beginning. Soon the whole bay has been surveyed. Evaluation of the structures clearly shows these are Hanse-type layouts. Combined with the other finds, this is definite proof. Notau has been retrieved from the fog of history. And this is what it would have looked like. Piers, houses for storing and trade, residential buildings, and a church. And yet, did the cog from Dars still call at Notau? Or at the new establishment in Bergen harbor? This, for once, the archaeologists can't tell. The cargo would have been the same in both cases. At least, Bergen would have been the safer option, since the German pier was next to the residence of the Norwegian king. He had granted the Hanse quite a few privileges, but then the League became too powerful for his liking. In 1284, he prohibited all foreign trade north of Bergen with the intention of taking it over himself. Yet there must have been ways to circumvent the royal ban. Why else would the king have to renew his order several times with ever sharper threats of reprisal? Natasha is positive that she will find archaeological evidence proving that the Hanseatic merchants ventured far more north than assumed until now. And she's right. There is news from Viligrad. An oak barrel retrieved from the wreck of the cog. After it has been cleaned in the lab, there's even the owner's mark clearly visible on the lid. Next to the barrel lay the antlers of a reindeer. In medieval times, it was the raw material for combs, tokens, and beads. Yet the real sensation is the content of the barrel. Yellow sulfur. It was in huge demand for fumigating barrels, as medicine, and in increasing amounts to produce the latest addition to weaponry, gunpowder. The exciting point about it is sulfur back then was solely found on Iceland, which was also under Norwegian rule. So, did the cogs break the royal embargo? The island of fire and ice might provide the answer. Did the German Hanse push forward to the land of geysers as early as the 14th century? To the end of the world as it was known then? Although she is now 8 months into her pregnancy, Natasha is determined to inspect the sulfur fields at Krysuvik, where the yellow crystals, it is said, still can be found. But first she'll use the hot springs to boil 2 eggs, one for herself and one for her baby. The sulfur samples she collects at Krysuvik will be analyzed in the lab. the results will show that the composition of the Icelandic sulfur and that from the cog's barrel is 100% identical. After 10 minutes, there's 2 hard-boiled eggs. They'll keep her going, along with her son, for whom she has chosen an Icelandic name, Sölvi. Sölvi stands for both son and strength she may need, since she hasn't found any archaeological evidence yet for the presence of Hansa merchants on Iceland. The sulfur may just as well have been brought home by Norwegian middlemen and then loaded onto the cog at Bergen. An excavation should help to clarify matters. It's a special site. At the base of the mythical Snæfellsnes Glacier, the very spot where Jules Verne, in his novel Journey to the Center of the Earth, had his heroes enter the world below. Excavating a sand dune poses quite a challenge. Time and again, the loose ground caves in. Yet, the effort is worth it. There are bones of codfish, but no heads, just like in the cog. So this too was a place where people produced stockfish. And there's a whetstone, again like one of those in the cog. To Natasha, it's evident.
This was a triangular or even a multilateral trade, which started to develop as early as the late Middle Ages, and then spread through Europe and subsequently worldwide.
Yet all this isn't sufficient proof for the presence of the German Hansa that far north. If there's any more evidence, it's somewhere out there. But where? A lonely beach on Iceland's gale-blown west coast. High on a cliff above a sheltered bay, there are stone foundations which immediately draw the researchers' attention. Geophysical equipment is applied to trace the layout of what seems to have been a building. The shards that come to light are of German origin, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they were brought here by Germans. Gradually, the remnants of the building are laid open. However, it's a disappointment. The layout is a classical Icelandic design. It's the night of midsummer solstice. Farmers from all over the area have met for their traditional celebration of the longest day of the year. It's a welcome diversion for Natasha. She may be frustrated by the recent results, yet she still believes that she'll find traces of the Hansa Empire here in faraway Iceland. Even if nautical experts have long argued against this option. The cogs, they say, didn't have the navigational equipment necessary to cover such distances across the open seas of the north. But Natasha finds an ally in the archives in Iceland's capital. A vault in Reykjavik. Natasha is impatient to see what the head archivist will show her. It's the manuscript of a contemporary witness. The Hauksbók. About 1300 AD, one Haukur Erlendsson wrote down all kinds of information relating to the seafaring of his times. He describes how to sail from Bergen to Greenland without any maps or compass, just by using a plumb line to read the bottom of the sea. And among the finds in the wreck off Dars, there was just such a plumb of lead, the first of its kind ever found. Its lower part had been filled with fat, which served as an adhesive to bring up particles from the various sea bottoms, helping the navigators to plot their course. And then, finally, there is a reference to Iceland. So the cogs might indeed have managed the voyage. It's a boost for Natasha and proof that the combination of archaeological and historical sources pays off. She'll continue her search in the land of volcanoes. Luckily, they are long extinct, as was already recorded on ancient drawings of the Hekla. This mountain doesn't burn anymore. Friedrich Lüth has met with a collector of ancient maps. Oswald Dreyer-Eimke once held the office of Consul of Iceland in Hamburg, Germany for more than 20 years.
Here we have a reference to sulfur.
And here to stockfish.
Sulfur and stockfish, the main commodities of the Hanse's trade. Yet, are there also place names hinting at the presence of German merchants?
There's Kumbrumvik.
And this means?
Vik means bay.
Like in Reykjavik and Kumbrum?
It comes from kumbara, that's for cargo ships. So, Kumbrumvik is the bay of the cargo ships.
Now they just have to find Krumvik, as it was also spelled. The old maps point the way. To the peninsula of Snaefeldsnes. A comparison of historical with actual maps has narrowed down the search to a few bays. On Iceland, he's a character. Hildibrandur, the shark farmer. His dried shark's meat is a notorious local treat. The stench may be overwhelming, but taking a bite is a must. Natasha politely declines, pointing to her state of pregnancy. She knows that the taste will linger on for days. Yet the ordeal pays off. The bay they are looking for, Hildibrandur says, lies right under their noses. He's familiar with the old place names, so hopes are high that, having traveled hundreds of kilometers across all Iceland, they've finally made it. Natasha sums up what they have found out so far.
The place names are really a great clue. In Icelandic, this promontory is called Kaupstaðartangi, which means promontory of the traders, and the bay is called Kumbarahugur, the bay of the cargo ships. So we have two references for trade.
Lüth and Natasha once more turn to high-tech equipment to back up their information with archaeological evidence. They chart the area above the bay with a differential GPS, recording each topographical detail and its height above sea level. For instance, the prominent patterns of tiny knolls. But not every elevation is a grown-over foundation wall. Excavating the site would take months, so they rely on technology to track actual layouts. Without having to use a spade, the archaeologists succeed in identifying the layout of a trading house. But was it Scandinavian or German style? This is how the settlement of the merchant of Krumvik might have looked like. The layout, as well as the wooden architecture, are definitely not Scandinavian, but of German origin. Lüth and Natasha have their proof.
How can you tell that this was an establishment of the Hansa?
Well, there are the clues from historic maps. And if we look at the topography, with its wonderfully protected bay where even bigger ships can anchor, we see all the prerequisites for such a place. Then, immediately next to the shore, a bit higher up on dry land, there are the remnants of a building we've been able to document.
It's quite clear that this layout is distinctively different from trading sites of the purely Norwegian era. It's a typically German layout.
These buildings were solely for trading purposes. The traders came here once a year, for a few weeks perhaps, stayed on their ships, and each morning they went over to the buildings on the land where they exchanged their goods. The Icelanders traders brought their commodities, stockfish or some sulfur, and traded them for the goods from the ships.
Beer was another favorite commodity. There was a brew of lesser quality for the ship's crews, and then the trader's brand, which was reserved for sale.
So the German Hansa did trade with the Icelanders without any middlemen. Ignoring the ban from the king in Bergen, they exchanged their famous beer for sulfur and stockfish, making a fortune once they got back. Displaying courage, a pioneering spirit, and a knack for lucrative opportunities, the German merchants built an empire that even as early as the Middle Ages spanned far wider than the Baltic Sea. The advance of the Hansa into the world of the North opened new horizons.
So we're standing here at the border of an immense empire stretching from Novgorod to Greenland.
Yes, there is evidence that the Hansa traded even as far as Newfoundland. It was a gigantic economic empire built on trust, and it worked. Basically, it was a precursor of the European Economic Union, or the EU.
The Hansa, a European Union of the Middle Ages, a fascinating concept. It shows how modern and transnational people were thinking some 700 years ago. The presence of the Hansa in the north had long been forgotten. Today we know that their cogs sailed to Iceland and maybe even as far as Newfoundland. A role model for success which did not depend on violence and exploitation, but on trust and reliability, on the exchange of goods for the better of both sides. The Hansa, a league of seafaring merchants from free cities, and a ship sunk more than 600 years ago helped to clarify how far they did advance. His owner could expect a handsome profit as it closed in on the German part of the Baltic coast around 1350 AD. But as it seems, he fell victim to a fierce gale. The cog ran aground, sprang a lethal leak, and sank rapidly, taking its cargo down with it. Bad luck for the merchant, a windfall for the archaeologists. The Baltic Sea claimed a victim of a forgotten chapter of history, yet it also preserved it and, in the end, returned it to science. The cargo of a foundered medieval cog helped to establish the true range of the German Hansa, as a reminder of an economic empire that constituted the origins of modern Europe. And as for Natasha, she has given birth to her Sölvi, the sun and the strength.